Here it is, my vision board. And this year, as you can tell, I thought it'd be a brilliant idea to draw it all out. And yes, it sounded like a good idea at the time. It was. It taught me to learn one of the most valuable lessons of my life, and I think we all require learning this thing. But obviously, more on that at the end of the video, because I gotta explain the other side of the story. At the time, it was just more content for my channel, a visually appealing vision board, meaning that I'll look at it often, plus a fun activity in my off time. But as I just got married, it's been hard to come up with other goals other than things associated with my wife and my future family, my kids, which I will have eventually. It was hard to come up with any other goals, what I mean, that weren't affiliated with trying to find a way to provide for my wife and future kids. Not to mention, my life has been changing frequently since creating this vision board. So each goal differs so much from the next that it kind of, it almost doesn't make sense to me. And that will become evident later as I start to talk about my goals. But also at the same time, that's kind of where I hit my wall. Because every time I sat down just to draw, I couldn't stop thinking about how much pressure I feel. Pressure to succeed, pressure to not waste time, and especially on something that like just might not work. But also like the pressure to turn those dreams into a reality, and not just any dream, but those awfully big dreams. And when that kind of pressure builds up, it's easy to feel like, why even bother? But then I realized something. If I don't tell my story, you know, like the real story, the one with the pressure, the hardship, the sadness, then perhaps I'm robbing somebody else of the chance to see that they're not alone. And maybe even my future family. Right from the beginning, before any of this was drawn out, or before I even had the idea, I was faced with a huge problem. And that was, I got married. Now, hold on, getting married wasn't necessarily the problem, it's just that it's expensive. After the ring, the honeymoon, and every other various thing, you're broke. And yet, it's still the greatest thing I've ever done, and will ever do. But let me explain this. For 6 months, I worked for my almost dream car, and I got it. 6 months of dedicated elbow grease, and I even got the sound system. And lo and behold, the second I got back from my honeymoon, my car was robbed, and the sound system was nowhere to be found. Fast forward a few weeks. Right before starting this vision board, I had a day where all I could think about was how was I gonna make it work for my wife, and my future family, and for myself. I spent the whole day just thinking about how on earth I was just gonna make it all work. Finally, as I was driving home, I crashed. Not my car though, but kinda. More on that in a second. It was more of a mental crash. Instead, all I could do was turn to God in prayer. And after praying harder than I had ever had, I started to hear a clicking from my engine bay. And then the next day, my car started leaking coolant. Now, I am all too familiar with this sort of problem. This wasn't my first rodeo, but this time something was a little bit different. So I took it to the shop, and lo and behold, just a few hours later, more bad news. They sent me a list of problems with my beloved car, longer than a receipt from CVS. And that says a lot. And I would take the time to tell you guys everything that was wrong, but it would take this whole entire video. Instead, let me just say this. After all of our expenses, we definitely could not afford it. I was broken, and nothing hurts more as a man than not being able to provide for your family, for your wife, for those you have stewardship over. About this time, I felt like I had nothing else to do but to refocus my focus on the power of prayer. I had really felt like I had no other option. God had slapped me in the face for the last time, fingers crossed, and now I was listening. Finally, an answer. It was an answer that, funny enough, that I had received every single time that I had prayed before, specifically about this type of situation. But for some reason, I always avoided it. Pursue art. It suddenly made sense. I was finally humble enough at that point, and all I knew was that I had to trust God. Despite the way I felt, or the insurity, and all of the what ifs that I had. See, the truth is, I've always had art in my life, but I've always tried to run away from it. Each of my family members make most of their money from art, so I started here. And with the first goal being my family, Then the second goal being 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, and yes, it is lofty. The third being my dream car. Fourth being business. Fifth being a duplex for passive income. By the time I had reached the sixth, I had been praying so hard, but all of these goals felt so far away. And I started to feel, to be honest, a little discouraged. But again, all I knew was one thing. I knew I needed Christ. And with that, I needed to be more Christ-like. And so I picked up the pencil again. This time, not to create a perfect vision of what I want, but to reflect on where I'm at. And then I drew him. My goals started to shift. Then as I'm drawing now, I had to have something that could provide for a God-fearing and family-providing life. So I drew my art goal of painting 50 paintings this year. And then I drew financial freedom. All I've wanted is to make enough money passively to be able to provide for my family and give them everything that I have, my time, my energy, and everything else. To one day raise up my family to do good always. Then yeah, I got distracted. And I drew my dream body. Essentially, I want a good looking vessel while I'm at it. But finally, I couldn't help but notice the bald spot peeking out from the top of my vision board. I'm like, yeah, I could put something in there, might clutter the space up, or I could put something meaningful, something that would change the course of my life forever, specifically this year. Then it hit me. The answer is what I've been doing this whole entire time. And this is the last drawing. It's a camera. And it might not be the perfect sketch either. And honestly, I know, it's awkward. You were not expecting that whatsoever. I believe you. But let me explain. Because at the end of the day, my biggest goal right now is simple. Tell my story. My real story. That's the most valuable thing. That's the most valuable thing I can leave behind. No filters, no shortcuts, just me. And maybe, just maybe, that's what your vision board needs. Not just the goals of the year, not the things that you want necessarily, although those are great motivators. But beyond all things, your vision lacks a story.